Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast with Kate Riga. Today, we're going to talk about the unfolding Menendez scandal. Although it's in a way, I'm not even sure to call it a scandal exactly. Because when I think of a scandal, it's um, it's about something unfolding, something surprising, right? A scandal, like, oh my God, uh, Kate was revealed to have a secret menagerie of ferrets in her home. That's against DC law, right? And it's a huge scandal. Like, why is Kate doing this, right? So it's like something bad and a surprise and all this kind of stuff. Um, but with Menendez, it's sort of like it's kind of not a surprise, right? And kind of like there doesn't even seem to be a huge amount of appetite to find out the next detail. It's all just about who's going to ask him to resign and stuff. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what is the latest unfolding in Congress about this seemingly inevitable shutdown. And then we're going to talk about miscellaneous things. We're also going to talk about there's a debate tonight, a kind of the second of these, kind of uncanny valley of Republican debates, right? Because there's nothing actually happening. There's not really a a a nomination election. There's not a primary process. It's not really happening. I was almost thinking about, I saw a lot of headlines, in the last couple days saying it's do or die for DeSantis. This is it's do or die. It's now or never. But like he's already dead, right? So like, is it really do or die? I mean, his campaign is like collapsed, and it's collapsed in a primary process that isn't even happening. Like when I almost wonder if this reality is going to kind of push through into this debate tonight. Like it's almost like when I think about it, it's almost like people are on a family vacation and they get to Disney World, and slowly and then suddenly people realize, wait a second, there are no rides. We paid all this money to go. Where are the rides? Where are the roller coasters? Where are the stuff? What's going on here? Because like they're doing this debate, but there's no election. It's so weird. Like they're all in their Bermuda shorts and tourist T-shirts and stuff, and there's no Disney World. What are they doing up there? The whole thing is bizarre. Um, so we're going to talk about all of those things. So, but let's start out, Kate. What is the latest on what is happening on Capitol Hill?
So the funny thing about it is there's been quote unquote movement, but nothing has changed since we talked about this last. So kind of the latest is after just the complete collapse in the House last week where they couldn't pass, the procedural stuff that always passes, when Matt Gaetz, Speaker of the House, kind of said, we're not going to pass any kind of continuing resolution, McCarthy was like, okay, we'll go back to passing these individual spending bills, which is like terrific. I mean, that does nothing for the shutdown, passing bills that even if you can kind of force them through the House, dead on arrival in the Senate. So meanwhile, the Senate has used, a kind of miscellaneous House vehicle, because these kind of bills have to originate in the House, to do a relatively clean CR on the Senate side, pass that, and hand it back to the House. And as of like last night, this morning, McConnell and Schumer kind of came to an agreement. They would pass this mostly clean CR. It would fund the government until November 17th. And it would give about like $6 billion each to
Ukraine is part of it. There's some
I
more
was just
Ukraine.
checking the number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$6 billion each to Ukraine and disaster relief funding. So a pretty bare bones kind of thing. the usual kind of spending item that it's easy for everyone to vote for, right?
And basically, they're ignoring all of this. There needs to be more cuts. That whole drama. They're just not even getting into that. It's a clean CR with the addition of things that, at least in the Senate, most people agree on. So it's all good and whatever.
Exactly. Now, the problem is I am I don't think there's any CR that could pass the House with this posture right now, because Gates has basically just said, like, we're not doing a CR. So, and he's got enough people in his kind of burn it all down caucus that they can say no to anything, including this really kind of anodyne, unobjectionable bill. They'll probably stake their opposition to this one in the Ukraine funding, but that's not what it's really about. They are just kind of dead set on a shutdown. They've got the numbers to force it. So now the Senate's going to do what they've largely been doing throughout, with the exception of the kind of Ron Johnson hiccup, which is acting like adults, collaborating on a CR, making it really easy, simple, palatable. They passed the.
Just a small technical question.
Mhm.
Is there any significance to November 17th? Is there something happening on that day
I
that
think
is significant, or
I
what's
think
that
the
about?
idea is that it's just before Thanksgiving, so people will feel pressured to get something done so they can go home for the holiday.
So it sets up a sort of favorable pressure for the next shutdown
Exactly.
drama,
Yeah.
basically. Got it. Okay.
And they passed the procedural rule to kind of advance that legislation by a huge lopsided majority. So as of now, unless we get another kind of Ron Johnson-esque hissy fit, it seems pretty clear that the CR will pass the Senate. And then you've got pressure on the House, right? Because here's a way out of the shutdown. Like, if you approve this, the shutdown will be averted. But the same dynamics that have persisted throughout this process exist now, which is, to pass that, it would have to be the kind of sane House Republicans plus House Democrats, and that would existentially endanger McCarthy's job. So he just hasn't been willing to kind of turn to genuinely the only off ramp to either averting the shutdown or opening the government back up post shutdown, which is going to have to include House Democrats. And he, very well may not be able to weather that storm.
So, okay. So just for our listeners to understand here, all of this really comes down to, when you say posture, it's a shutdown. There's no way out of it. As long as Kevin McCarthy is not willing to entertain the possibility of a coalition of most of Republicans or half of Republicans, a lot of Democrats. It's like we're in this as long as he will only do it with Republicans only.
Right.
A. And then the second point is, and this is the point I've been hitting on in a few pieces I've written and various jabbering on social media, is that this is not a case where the House is saying, all right, here's our bill where we cut everything forever, or abolish the Department of Education, or these kind of extreme bills. And now it's a matter of take our bill, take it or leave it. We're willing to do a shutdown. You Senate softies, Biden, whatever. They are not able to even pass anything. So this is not in any meaningful sense a fight, a standoff, a game of chicken between the House and the Senate. This is just happening inside the House. They're not even passing anything. And I know I have sort of, I'm kind of a broken record, but that's so astounding that that's happening. Like they can't even come up with to the extent that we are having a standoff between different branches of government or different houses of Congress, they're not even able to come up with their position to have a standoff on,
Right.
which is extraordinary.
Kind of the bigger question that we're starting to approach is, will House Democrats kind of demand concessions from McCarthy to bail him out? Whether that be on the motion to vacate, the attempt to oust him from the speakership, or, some kind of legislation to reopen the government. Like, he, at that point, would need them. And House Democrats,
Right.
like Democrats across the board, are still really, really pissed at him for reneging on the debt ceiling agreement like in the days after. And you saw that in a really pointed way where McCarthy's kind of latest flailing gambit was, well, if Joe Biden would just like come to the negotiating table with me, we could figure something out. And everyone's like, are you kidding? Like, absolutely not. This is the guy who you just screwed over weeks ago, after he did come to the negotiating table and do good faith and all that kind of stuff. So the real question is,
And you're
are,
not even mentioning impeachment.
yeah, totally.
He's pushing this impeachment thing kind of
Which is
like
top of the list of what House Democrats are kind of mulling, what they would need in exchange for their support. Maybe that would include dropping the faux impeachment thing.
you make a really good point, and I think that I have heard too little. I people are not making this point, and it's so important that whether or not he makes a deal or just concedes to reality now to prevent the shutdown, at some point the shutdown has to end. And he'll need them then. So at some point he needs to excuse me. He needs to figure something out with Democrats because I mean for our listeners to kind of walk you through this, the Freedom Caucus types are going to demand a level of cuts, which again, good point, bringing up the fact we're here because they broke the last agreement, at least the spirit of the agreement, if not the binding letter of the agreement. That's a whole other story. They're going to demand something that the Senate will never agree to, and the White House will never agree to. So whether you kind of bite that bullet now, pre-shutdown, or to end the shutdown, you're going to have to do it. There's no way out of this straitjacket.
Right.
So let me ask you this. Do you have more of I mean, one of the things that I've seen more discussion of over the last week is that this shutdown could have real economic, it could really damage the economy. And that isn't just a big deal because, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot or cut your own leg off or something like that. But that obviously has real political implications for the Democrats, right? We're kind of all the freak out about Joe Biden being 157 years old and all this kind of stuff, that the economy is by some measures doing very well, inflation down, but it all still remains, sort of tentative and could go either way. And that has really big political implications. Do you have more of a sense now? Where are Democrats on this in House and Senate Democrats? Where are they on this in terms of, are they basically willing to say, hey, we don't want to shut down, but like if you dudes want to do it, whatever, since you're doing it, everybody's going to blame you? Or are they worried about the economy? Where are they?
I think
What posture are they in?
definitely more in that first bucket. It's interesting. Elizabeth Warren's the only person who brought up to me that political angle. She was like, House Republicans are shutting down the government because they think it'll help Trump win the election, which is a piece of this that really hasn't gotten talked about in some ways because I don't think that this section of the House Republican caucus necessarily needs a motive to do what they're doing right now. Like, kind of breaking
Right.
the government is in their DNA, whether or not there's, an additional calculation. But yeah, they've maintained that posture from the beginning. And now you've got this kind of additional piece of the Senate being like, we are literally doing everything we can to avert a shutdown right now. And it's just, and you're hearing this from Democrats and Republicans. That's why I was kind of flabbergasted. There was this Morning Consult poll out this week that showed in the aggregate, a third of people would blame House Republicans for a shutdown. And then when you combine the people who would blame Biden and House Democrats, it approaches 50%, which is just, I think that's, if there's a concern from Democrats, it's that there are so many people in this country who don't pay any attention, and there's a concern that they'll just kind of blame the president. But I think
Right.
anyone, who's paying any kind of attention, there are just the White House has been like blasting out these memos. There's just endless list of quotes from Republicans saying, it's these guys, it's this clown troop in our caucus, and that's not conservative Republican and Republicanism and blah blah blah. So I think it's almost similar positioning where they are with the Biden impeachment thing, which is pretty confident that it'll backfire, pretty confident that people will understand that this is just kind of vindictiveness post Trump, and there's no there. But you don't want this kind of stuff in the headlines on because there's some segment of the electorate who will just read the headline, or who will just hear there's a government shutdown or Biden's being impeached, and kind of draw their own conclusions from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've recently had some questions about morning consult polls in general, their methodology, which is another question. Um, I don't. I think I think it's very unlikely that Democrats will get blamed for this shutdown. I think Republicans will get blamed for it.
I think so
The
too.
question, the question though, is how much that matters. And I think what we saw, and this was, you know, this I think this was by design in the Obama years, that Republicans would do these hostage takings, do these shutdowns, all these different things. They knew that in some short term sense, they would kind of take the hit in the headlines, but they were always careful to do it not on the eve of an election. And they also knew that they would benefit more from the general sense of nothing works, the government doesn't work. And in the case of the political economy of the 2011, 12, 13 era, that if we force a lot of spending cuts and damage the economy, Obama's president. So kind of like, yeah, in this short-term sense, there's a lot of headlines and you'll see some, kind of short-term polls that we suck. But at the end of the day, it's the president's fault. And so kind of it's all gravy for us. It's kind of all good. And, these in that larger sense, I think it is, you know, I think it's unclear. But do we now? I think it's worth remembering that 6 months ago, it seemed, or 5 months ago, it seemed kind of clear that we were about to have either a debt default or some sort of like quasi debt default. It seemed like that was happening, and then all of a sudden there's like a deal, and a lot of us, including myself, was just incredulous, like, wow, how did this happen? So what is the drop dead date here? It's like Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And is that, in this case, is that a date that is there's not, as in the case with the default issue, this kind of question, well, we don't know exactly when the money's going to, it's just a date thing. That's the law. It stops on that date.
Just
So there's no question about it.
the end of the fiscal year. Yeah. So.
Right. Okay. So we have 2 or 3 days,
Mm-hmm.
and the Senate has queued this up where they're basically saying, here, just pass this and this all goes away.
Mm-hmm.
Just like simple, there's no whatever. I suspect they might even be willing, like if somehow the House people came back and said, okay, we'll do it. Just, we can't do that $6 billion of Ukraine stuff. That's the kind of thing I suspect the people in the Senate and the White House would just go, okay, like we'll get to that later. So your read is that there doesn't at least seem like we're going to get that kind of cat, pull something out of a bag at the last minute.
Yeah, I mean, that's the weird part of this situation, which it's been throughout. If McCarthy was kind of willing to pass another must pass piece of legislation, mostly on the backs of House Democrats, the shutdown could be averted. I think we're still out far enough that there's enough time to, jump through the kind of procedural hoops of passing legislation. So there's a chance of that. But you had last night, McCarthy announced this big press availability for like 7 p.m. last night. We're kind of making our coverage plans and everything. And then it's just, he's out there crowing about passing, not even the bills, just passing the rule to pass the bills of this like handful of appropriations bills that they're going to try to pass out of the House that, again, are dead on arrival in the Senate. And it's like, if
And it's
that's
also just like a third of them.
right,
It's not even most of that.
exactly.
It's like, so, and again, dear listeners, I know I'm a broken record, but like they're not even, they're passing what, 3 out of 12. I mean, it's just absurd. I don't. Here's the other thing I think is worth, and I know you know this, but I think for our listeners is that, we hear these things like, what would it take for the Democrats? What would they need? Would they need for him to, unbreak the agreement he broke in May? Would they need him to kind of unpre-impeach Joe Biden, to basically give him the votes to sustain his speakership? But what's clear is that the second his speakership relies on Democratic votes, he is done. He is 100% done in a way that he's probably not ever going to be done from the Freedom Caucus. That is just the kiss of death. And the idea that he would pull back this impeachment inquiry, he would even like that one dude from Nebraska. Is it Nebraska? Where's that one guy? Bacon? I can't remember the.
That's right.
Yeah, from even the most moderate, they would all say he's done. That is just all the kiss of death. So who
Yeah, and
knows?
it just that's where we've been for weeks, and that's where we still are. It's just the two realities of McCarthy maintaining his speakership and either averting or getting, reopening after a government shutdown. Those two things are just in direct contradiction. It really seems that you can't have both unless, he could do something to kind of make the Matt Gaetzes back off. And maybe getting the shutdown would be enough for them, but it really doesn't seem like it. And it's we're seeing in real time that it is nearly impossible to satisfy a group of people whose main driving, the carrot to all their action is attention. So they're just going to keep doing what gets them attention, and threatening the leader of their own party's gavel is dramatic and exciting. An motion to vacate has never been successful. It's barely been tried. Leaving the copies of the pre-drafted statements in bathrooms. I mean, this is what they live for. And McCarthy's been encouraging them for years. And this is what you get.
Now, is there still some cleavage or fracture between the sort of the Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, those types, and like Jim Jordan and Marjorie Greene, like the way it was in the speaker thing, and in where they're kind of like on, kind of taking a different position, a more transactional position, or is that just they're kind of on board with this Gates stuff as much as he is?
I think ultimately there would be, because Jordan and Green in particular have been so empowered by McCarthy in a way that I think they probably have some gratitude about. Jordan has his big committee. Green had been cast out to the hinterlands, and now she's kind of being an important quasi member of leadership now. And that's not uniform. I mean, Green voted against the kind of procedural move to advance the defense bill, which ended up collapsing and being really embarrassing for McCarthy. So it's not 100% of the time. But I think if push came to shove, they would probably be on his side. He's done more for them than the Gates Boebert caucus anyway. He's not fighting with Marjorie Taylor Greene in bathrooms. So some loyalty on that front, I think.
Right. Okay. So what about What's the story? What's the latest on the Menendez thing, the
S-
non-scandal scandal?
Since last you wrote, the only change has been more. Like it was led by John Fetterman, right? He was the first one who called on him to resign over the weekend, and he was out there by himself for a while. But what we were kind of thinking is they came back Tuesday evening. The second they step foot in the Capitol complex, there are going to be microphones shoved in their face, and everyone's going to say, should he resign? So as the hours kind of ticked down to that deadline, more and more statements came out. After Fetterman, it was kind of led by people who are up in vulnerable seats. Like you had Tester, you had Brown, you had Jackie Rosen in Nevada. Those kind of came at the forefront. And then the
Right.
biggest one was Cory Booker from New Jersey, who is a good friend of Menendez, who considers him a mentor, who is a character witness in his defense in the first corruption trial.
Oh, I didn't realize. I didn't have quite a sense of the nuances of their relationship.
Yeah.
Because my general sense here is that certainly in one thing I explained in a post that probably some of our listeners read is that, uh, 2.5 days or 3 days ago, whenever it was, uh, the sort of the his dam was holding in D.C. You had Fetterman and Brown, but no one else. Schumer was basically saying he can, in so many words, he can stay. So kind of everything looked pretty good. But back in New Jersey, everybody had basically shivved him like instantly.
Mm-hmm.
The Democratic governor, the Democratic heads of the state, state house or state assembly and state senate, the head of the Democratic Party, and in New Jersey, I mean, it's a fairly corrupt state, right? And county chairs have a lot of juice in that state, and there are issues about how who gets placed where on primary ballots and stuff like that. So you really need you really need the endorsements of the county chairs, or the support of the county chairs to win a primary. Even if you're an incumbent, it's important. And like within a day, I think 10 out of 21 of them had called on him to resign. So I mean, it was just a bloodbath back in New Jersey, and now it's basically a bloodbath in D.C. And when I looked at that, the thing that jumped out to me is like, this guy does not have any friends, because you don't need to, the county chair of such and such county in New Jersey. First of all, it's not an elected position, so that person's like, oh, I'm up for reelection. I can't be defending Menendez. That's not how it works. So like, it just seemed like a lot of people were just fine saying like, fuck him, I'm done here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a stink on this guy for years, especially ever since the first one, his first kind of corruption trial. Um, but there's always been, I think, that sense about him that people always kind of knew he was pretty crooked. And when you see it, when you kind of extrapolate from the details in the indictment, the idea that he had the sword of Damocles hanging over him last time and escaped by the skin of his teeth thanks to a hung jury, and then started up this shit again less than a month after he got off. I mean, that takes a certain kind of personality type, a certain kind of arrogance about your safety in this world to operate that way, that I think probably trickles down into his behavior on a more kind of day-to-day basis. As far as the friendship stuff goes, Booker is the first person who I've seen a lot of about their relationship. But I think you also just get to a place where if you're like a rank and file Democrat who doesn't have any extraordinary connection to this guy, it's like, are you going to be one of the holdouts? Are you going to be one of the people being like, no, I think he should stay? I mean, most of them don't want that kind of attention. Most of them honestly don't want to be anywhere near this whole situation. They probably kind of wish that he would just disappear and get replaced with like Andy Kim or something. So it is funny. It's such a game of momentum in Congress, you know? As soon as you have a critical mass, everyone else is gonna jump off the cliff as well so as not to be singled out by their, reluctance to go with the crowd.
Right. I mean, it's also the case, and it's hard to kind of think about how to capture this. But if this were like, Elizabeth Warren, and obviously it's not random that it's not Elizabeth Warren, but I'm just saying in the sense of Elizabeth Warren is a big name. She's associated with a lot of big ideas that people care about tremendously. She is just a big institution in the Senate, right? People who had never heard of Bob Menendez know about Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, a whole list of Sherrod Brown in his own way. There's lots of people there who people might say like, "Wow, it looks bad," but like, ah, this is an important person. I'm not gonna like close the book on them. I'm going to let them do it themselves. That sort of thing. And I just, what is Bob Menendez associated with that people know anything about or care about outside the state of New Jersey? And that's not necessary. There are other senators who are doing a good job and they're not well known out of their state, but it's just he doesn't have any of that. And even, I mean, I don't want to get into the whole Al Franken thing, but obviously there are lots of Democrats, rightly or wrongly, who are still pissed that he was run out of the Senate because he was Al Franken and all the different stuff that was involved in that. And you made the point, but I still can't get over the fact of how is it you could not keep your nose clean after you came so close, not only to ending your career, but ending up in prison. That really, I mean, it is a profound arrogance, but I mean, man, you must be seriously corrupt. It's like being a heroin addict or something. Like you could not give it up.
I know. I mean, part of what I think is also causing this response is just, my God, does the indictment have him dead to rights or what? This is just the indictment. This is not, as we've all gotten so knowledgeable about indictments, the prosecutor doesn't have to lay out the kind of nuts and bolts of the argument. It's just supposed to be the broad strokes. And here you've got, the photos of his monogram jackets stuffed with his money. You've got the gold bars. You've got a really extensive paper trail from texts, going back and forth about this stuff. Him posting the new convertible he'd gotten as a bribe. It's just, they've got so much there that I think the kind of common understanding is there's just no way he wiggles out of this one. And as you say, without the any institution of the Senate stuff, his kind of biggest realm is he was chair of foreign relations before this happened. So it's more an international sphere. And progressives in that world don't like him because he's pretty hawkish for a Democrat. So even
And
if,
very hawkish on the Cuban embargo,
right,
which
right.
a lot of people for
So
good
even if
reason
you
don't
were
like.
kind of going to maybe get the nerdy foreign affairs guys, you don't have them either. So your
Right.
pool of support's so small, it looks almost certain like he's going to go down for this. And so then you're left with the obvious conclusion, which is like, what's politically beneficial here? Is it to stick with this guy until he either gets walloped in a primary or, gets taken out in handcuffs? Or is it better to keep the really important campaign distinction very clear, which is Democrats condemn Trump's criminality and they condemn the criminality, the alleged criminality of one of their own. Make sure there's no fuzziness that Republicans can't say you guys are just as bad as we are. And then, put your weight behind, whether it be Andy Kim or anyone else who's going to vote the Democratic way 100% of the time and, get to keep the moral high ground in the process.
Yeah, I mean, he's. It just seems to me that it's not even like from what I know of that state, and I know a bit about it. I lived there for a number of years, and I follow the politics of the state relatively closely. It it's never a kind of a slam dunk to defeat an incumbent in a primary, but I think this is close because again, it's he's a very powerful person in the state, or was a very powerful person in the state. Although the fact of how the entire sort of Democratic political machine abandoned him in a dime says he's actually not very powerful, or this destroyed his power. And just the way that state works, if you lose all of the sort of the county chairs, the sort of that are the the bedrock of the political machine in that state, um, you're toast. And it's not, it there was Bill Bradley was the senator from New Jersey for many years. And people like Bill Bradley, John Corzine, you have people who are successful politicians in that state, and they're not like machine guys in the way that Menendez is. And maybe someone like that could, sort of defy the machine in the way that Menendez would have to do. But those people aren't machine people. They have, like Bill Bradley was just a kind of a New Jersey institution. He had a public constituency. But I don't think Menendez has any of that. He's a machine guy. And if the machine abandons you, you're done.
Yeah. And then I'm sure this race will become crowded, but kind of right now in these early days, it's just Andy Kim who's declared. And the contrast just works so much in Kim's favor because Andy Kim is one of these kind of famous congressional nice guys, like a guy that everyone likes, that his staff like loves and has a lot of loyalty to. And then it's, what are our biggest kind of, as far as this goes, like nationwide images of Andy Kim? It's, if you know of him, it's probably because you saw the picture of him on his hands and knees cleaning up the Capitol after January 6th, taking a trash bag around, which is
I forgot that was him, but I remember those. I remember those images.
pretty
Yeah.
lovely. And I remember that being very emotional, gut punchy in the kind of aftermath of that. And then, the other thing, which got shared all over Twitter, is that he put a giant Lego set of the Millennium Falcon on his wedding registry, and his wife didn't approve. So he promised he would wait to build it until they had children. So 10 years later, they built this big Lego thing. So, it's just, everything about it looks bad for Menendez. He's not kind of famous enough or important enough or beloved enough to weather something like this. And to be honest, I'm not sure anyone would be. The details here are just so damning. The fact that everyone pretty much thinks that he did it before too, but kind of got off on a technicality. I saw Lawrence O'Donnell tweeting that he like wouldn't have Menendez on a show post the first kind of corruption thing because everyone kind of thought that he did it. So all those things conflate into the and then the easiest kind of political and emotional answer are the same, right? Like, why in this cycle, which is going to be so challenging, would you put your scant resources and time behind defending a guy who probably won't make it out of the primary, and if he did, would endanger an extremely safe blue seat? So there are no incentives kind of on any level, personal, professional, what have you, that keep him politically alive here.
The one thing that occurred, I mean, the only caveat I would say to what you've said about, like, the kind of the certainty of his guilt is that, well, two things. One is, you only need one juror, right, to hang a jury. Although in his defense, his last jury where he got off was hung in the opposite direction. I believe it was documented that he had 10 for acquittal and two for conviction, which is a little, is not
Interesting.
one holdout. And I would say that the other trial was, the other indictments were, as I understand this new one, significantly less damning. It was, that one was kind of like, you've got this kind of sugar daddy, contributor friend who takes you on vacations, and buys you presents and you do favors, and kind of that the Supreme Court has made it pretty challenging to win those cases just in the
while they're engaging in that behavior
yeah,
themselves.
exactly. And that one was largely, although not exclusively, the cash aspects of it were campaign contributions, and that's different from
Mm.
money, kind of money in your pocket. So this one is much more damning. And but it, again, maybe he could get off, but when he says kind of like, wait to hear the whole story, I said in a post, like, how innocent could you be here, Bob? Like, okay, maybe you beat this, and maybe there's a legal argument that like that the prosecutors haven't quite lined this up so that you need to go to jail. But like, just that, like, I don't care if you need to go to jail. Like, this is just not acceptable behavior for a United States senator. And like, unless I mean, one thing, and I'm curious if you've heard any scuttlebutt about this. He made what just seems like an absurd claim in that press conference, where he said the reason he's got hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash in his house is because of his Cuban heritage. And you never know when a Castro is going to take over, and you gotta flee the country, or the banks are going to be nationalized. And you're like, dude,
I
come the
also
fuck on, dude.
love that vote of confidence from a US senator. Like, I'm just keeping this here in case our government collapses. You never know.
Well, there's two things. Is that his family left Cuba under Batista, who's the guy that Castro overthrew. I mean, not that we don't want to sort of overinterpret it and get too technical here. And Batista was not a great guy, to put it mildly. But the other, what I was struck by is, like, let's assume for the sake of conversation that he's just kind of like a Fox News hoarder waiting for the doomsday, and so, kind of gold bars in his house for Armageddon. You would have, if you're withdrawing $20,000 in cash over time, over decades, you're going to have bank records, right? This isn't like some kind of random thing, like we can't disprove it, he's claiming it. This is documented. You can't withdraw tens of thousands of dollars from a bank or anywhere and not have a record of it. And I guarantee you that you don't find out about the investigation for the first time when you get indicted. I mean, you find out about it informally, and almost always there are discussions with your lawyers because they want you to plead out. They want you to plead guilty, and just and whatever, especially for public officials. And there's gonna have been some point where they say, we found hundreds of thousands of dollars. And man, his lawyer would love to be able to say, you're not going to believe this, but there's this weird thing my client does, and here's the bank records. And if that's if that's the truth, the prosecutors certainly aren't going to want to go to trial and be embarrassed. Well, I mean, so like, it is so absurd. And yet, to your point, Kate, what else is he going to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the closest I got to being a prepper is that I like always kind of I kind of like the idea of keeping your money in like coffee cans under your bed, because I was like really into the Great Depression when I was in second grade, and I think that kind of sowed a lifelong distrust
That's so that's so nerdy.
that
That's
my
so
stuff
nerdy.
is
Yeah,
safe in a bank.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but he didn't even really have the wherewithal to like extend that argument to the gold bars. The gold bars went unaddressed, or like
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
right.
We have a story coming. Reserve judgment.
Or like what,
Yeah.
is the Benz also to help you escape the collapse of the regime? I mean, there's so much here. And the thing is, corruption cases are infamously hard to prove, especially in the US, where we kind of have legalized bribery in a lot of places. We have such, thanks to the Supreme Court, with the complete hollowing out of campaign finance law. I mean, that's legalized bribery. There's a reason people want to get these certain people into office, but you've got the cash in the pockets, you've got the gold bars, you've got the car, you've got the job for his wife where it's explicitly stated that she won't have to do any work. You know, you've got him leaning on the person at the agricultural department who's trying to break up the halal monopoly. You know, you've got him trying to put his weight behind getting a certain kind of prosecutor position filled in New Jersey with someone that he thinks will be pliable. There's just like, and this is just the indictment. Again, this is not the full scope of what they have. And there are like 10 different webs that all kind of interconnect to show very clearly that he's, you know, trying to carry water for these, you know, Egyptian people and trying to funnel them money and funnel them weapons. And these are all the kickbacks. It's just, it's easy to understand. If there's one thing this year has taught me, it is the sheer power of photos and indictments, because that is what people remember and that's what people hang on to. And in this one, it's just from this early point, it doesn't even seem close. And if it was close, you would have thought that when we heard him at his press conference, he would have offered up more of a defense than, you know, I'm a low grade prepper.
Right, right. Yeah, it is. Well, I suspect, and what I think will happen, and Andy Kim has an opportunity if he plays his cards right, because there's certain, New Jersey is one of the, New Jersey is like New York in the sense of like lifetime senatorships
Mhm.
for Democrats, same way it is in most southern states for Republicans. These things only come open, once in a generation. So kind of there's lots of people who would like that gig, but Kim is the one who has put his, kind of put his hat in there now. And when he did it, it was still kind of ballsy,
Mhm.
right? It was before everybody had done this, and that's if now it kind of seems like how could you go wrong? He's so guilty. But when he did that, that's more than saying resign. That's like, I'm giving up my seat because you suck so bad. I'm gonna run for Senate. And now, though, one of the ways that the sort of power players in New Jersey and in DC can sort of push this forward is if those county chairs saying, I'm for Andy Kim. So kind of like, if there's any question you have here about maybe I'm going to endorse you later, or maybe 10 people are going to get into this primary and you're going to kind of get renominated with 20% of the vote. No, we're all getting together around Andy Kim. So you're done. The only question now is whether you see the writing on the wall and depart with some dignity. I mean, I would expect, and the way these things normally play out is the person tries to slip by with saying they won't run for reelection to not have to resign, that's going to sort of um, relieve the pressure. And it might relieve the pressure because, like, if he's not running and everybody's saying resign, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, Democrats are going to say, like, he should resign, but I mean, we can't tackle him and make him like sign a resignation statement. So kind of it is what it is. But you know, I think the point is he's always been crooked, and everybody's kind of always known he was crooked. But knowing and seeing the evidence is different. And considering that he got caught so red-handed, I that's one of the reasons why everybody's kind of like, dude, this is on you. I mean, we kind of cut you some slack, but this is too much.
Yeah, and we have to get to our other couple things, but I just wanted to add real quick that it's kind of stunning the degree to which no Republicans have waded into this fray, because in a normal world, you pounce on that, right? You say like, "Oh, he sucks," and all the Democrats harboring him are corrupt and a betrayal of you, the people, and blah blah blah. And like all we basically have so far is Tom Cotton saying, you know, he deserves due process, and Democrats are just doing this out of political advantageousness, which is just, it's really funny that we've gotten so far down this rabbit hole that they can't really condemn corruption, even if it's of one of their enemies because they're harboring so much of it over on their side.
Yeah, no, it's revealing that that's what now counts as Republican trolling,
Yeah.
of saying you're obviously corrupt people are innocent or deserve their day in court, but there we are.
Right. Okay, so let's talk quickly. Trump has been kind of on a tear of late. He has called for Milley to be executed after this long Atlantic article came out that was all about kind of, we've had this genre all throughout the Trump era, but the adult in the room profile, right, which is about the kind of the people who've had esteemed careers and were well respected, and then worked for the Trump administration and had to make a game plan of how to have him not, set off the nukes, kind of thing. So he called for his execution. He threatened that he's going to take NBC off air if he wins a second term. Um, and this stuff has been happening kind of alongside when we got this Washington Post ABC poll that had Trump up by 10 points, which even in the meat of the story, when they released the poll, they said, this seems to be an outlier kind of compared to the national average. But predictably, it's done the two-prong work of making everybody freak out about Biden's electoral chances, and also kind of re-bringing up this conversation we've been having since 2015, and that has never really stopped, which is how to cover Trump, how media outlets fail in the coverage of Trump. Now we're in kind of the micro cycle of he's called for this guy to die and called to take NBC off the air, and it's not at all major news. It's kind of getting that treatment, the unsaid taciturn treatment of like, well, Trump's nuts, that he says what he says kind of thing, and just treating it as more of a sideshow than anything to be taken seriously or to be covered with any kind of like reporting might. So yeah, what do you think about that? The twists and turns of the Trump narrative this past week and a half or so.
Yeah, I kind of think of this as the paradoxical but maybe predictable um, effect of the whole "don't amplify Trump, don't give him oxygen" thing, which is something that I was telling a reader who actually I published this email on the site, and thinking about my response to this reader. In the pre-Trump days, we spent basically the decade before Trump reporting on giving lots of coverage to all the pre-Trumps, the people who ended up being hardcore Trumpers, and really presaged what was coming with Trump. And at the time, we got a lot of criticism for these people are just clowns. They don't matter. You're just giving them oxygen. You're making them more important than they are. Well, my sense has always been that we were sort of vindicated paradoxically by Trump, because it turns out they were the real people. And it was the John Boehners and Eric Cantors that kind of were meaningless. And there's, you've long had this idea. I mean, during Trump's presidency, endless criticisms of CNN, like, um, carrying his speeches live. You're making him more powerful by giving him attention. I've always thought that was basically misguided. And in some ways, in his post presidency, or maybe in his interregnum, you've had this thing where he's kind of self exiled to Truth Social. And these things about, executing Milley or taking Comcast off the air, he says stuff like this nonstop on Truth Social. It's not, I mean, it may be like, maybe 11 relative to the baseline of 10, but it's really not too much different. And what you've had is you have this dynamic where the channels of communication between him and his supporters are wide open. He talks to them on OAN and True Social and, all the little, Fox indirectly, blah, 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 blah. But it's like muffled for everybody else. So I think and then it gets, kind of remuffled in the limited mainstream media coverage of these things, because it gets sort of half both sided, but also this kind of thing of if this gets a headline in the New York Times, although this one case has been sort of an exception, it's like, Trump super mad, Trump lashes out at so and so, and you're like, okay, they're fighting again and whatever, and doesn't uh get the details. And I think that is a mistake, and it's caused by a lot of different things. But I think that there is this sort of, goo goo liberal thing about, don't give them attention. If we don't look at it, it won't exist, which has always been just wrong. But I think we're, you know seeing some of the upshot of it here.
Yeah, and I want to address the poll really quickly. First of all, caveat that I think we're so far out from the election that everyone who's kind of freaking out about every poll, I think, is a little bit of a waste of energy. They're just polls are useful as a snapshot of the electorate in the moment, and the electorate at this moment is so incomplete that it just barely matters. But the interesting thing here, I think, is we've now had a series of polls from particularly the Washington Post ABC collab that have shown Trump to be doing better than where kind of the aggregate of the rest of them are. And this is considered, a very kind of high quality poll. They had him up, I think, by 3 points and then by 7 points, and now this new one with 10 points. And it came out alongside another poll, which was a collab between kind of a Republican outfit and a Democratic outfit. And that one, I think, either had them tied or had Biden up one or two, which seems to be more in line with where everything is. And, on the kind of procedural side, if you're a pollster, you don't want to conduct a poll that is an outlier and then just be like, oh, well, sweep that under the rug. We're only going to release the stuff that kind of looks like what everyone else is doing.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
but I feel like we put it in the keep an eye on category, that we've now had a few from this group that have seemed to kind of be weighted a little more towards the right, unless they're the only ones who are calling it right and everybody else is wrong.
Yeah, I don't I'm not particularly concerned about that 10-point spread poll, because it is so out of line with all the other polls, and it's also um uh dramatically out of line with just recent history. I'm very confident that's an outlier. The real issue is that we have had, over the last month or so, we have had a number of, high quality phone poll type phone and other comparable level of reliability methodology polls that have shown the race basically tied.
Mhm.
You have one that Biden's up one. A lot of them actually literally tied. 46-46. I mean, I feel like there's been several that are literally 46-46. That is the story, and that is obviously worrisome. I don't, it's a poll a year out before the election means relatively little, but it doesn't mean nothing. It doesn't mean nothing. And one of the interesting things, given that we have this debate tonight, is one of the quasi arguments, to the extent they have any arguments, from Trump's notional challengers, is kind of like, hey, the electability, man. Well, it's pretty hard to make a strong electability argument if the guy who's unelectable is tied with the incumbent. And those should at least tell us that the fact that he's indicted multiple times has not made him unelectable. I think the big picture with all of these polls is that right now, um, the if all of these polls tell a common story, and that is high levels of Republican enthusiasm and unity around Trump, paradoxical as it is, or sad as it is, and on the Biden side, a great deal of uh, enervation and disillusionment and fracture among Democrats. And to a great extent, Donald Trump right now in these polls is running against the upset present. Do you love what's happening under Biden? And a lot of people say no, I don't love it. It's not great. Meanwhile, Biden is running against himself. You know, do you love Biden, or would you like someone better? And he's not doing well by that metric at all. But there's lots of reasons why, as a campaign gets engaged, the people who don't want to see Trump, at a certain point, it's no longer, do you love Biden or would you like a dynamic 50-year-old? It's, do you want Trump or Biden? And that has a way of clarifying people's kind of clarifying the reality of the situation. And I'm pretty confident that unfolding reality is going to have a big effect over the next 12 months. But and this is, I've been saying this for a long time, and a lot of other people have too, the real in that kind of terrain, in that kind of political environment, the real challenge for Biden is like Cornel West types and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. types and no labels types. Is that if people are in a kind of a foul mood and aren't satisfied with their choices, you give them these off ramps of third parties, and those can really do Biden in. So it's foolish to say those polls don't matter. They certainly don't tell you what it's going to be like in a year, and I think that there are a number of reasons to be cautiously optimistic, but also to kind of like don't remotely be complacent. There's no question.
So let's wrap with a little bit of light debate preview of what our lucky listeners can expect tonight. This is another one of those kind of undercard debates in terms of Trump has gotten very comfortable with not attending and will continue to not attend, and actually has gotten a bump in the polls since not attending. So I think we can kind of assume this is going to be his posture for the foreseeable future. I'm honestly have no idea if there are going to be general election debates this year or not. If both camps kind of don't see a point in attending them, or don't see a political upside in attending. But so for now, it's going to be the usual cast of characters, a little bit winnowed from last time. And the only person who has at all moved in the polls is Nikki Haley, has kind of crept up. But again, like Vivek Ramaswamy's little surge was last time, it's mostly just seemed to come at the expense of Ron DeSantis more than anyone touching Trump's huge lead. And he has dropped to, third and fourth in some of these polls in the first two states. So in some ways, it's like you said, it so doesn't matter. This is more of either they're kind of campaigning for a cabinet position or to kind of get their name out there so they can run in 28. It'll be interesting to see if some of the stuff we expected last time that didn't happen happens tonight. Like, I think both of our kind of biggest surprise from last time was Chris Christie's complacency. He didn't really
Just
go
low
after
energy. Yeah.
anyone. So
Yep.
I
Yep.
wonder if the kind of our particular feedback, but the feedback after that debate will kind of push him to be more aggressive this time. It would be interesting if he is more aggressive to see who he even goes after. Like, who is the second place person you would gun for at this point? I mean, are you gonna take Nikki Haley, try to drag her through the mud?
Yeah, it's I mean, to the extent that Nikki Haley has had a surge, it's like surging into double digits,
Right.
maybe,
Yeah.
kind of. And yeah, DeSantis has, I mean, I think he's still the leader in most, I mean, the sub leader,
Mhm.
the undercard leader in most of the national polls. But now he's down to like 15% or even less. And it's just that everybody else is so lower. So at this point, there's kind of no point. I mean, the support he seems to have is just kind of like, residual inertia. He's the one I've heard of, kind of. So it's not even clear who really has any interest in attacking him to kind of get his stuff, since he doesn't really have any stuff. And so that kind of, and he's just become kind of a punchline. But the whole race is a punchline. I mean, the only thing I can think that kind of makes any sense with a Chris Christie is to attack Trump. Again, almost certainly not that it matters, but if you're going to be there, why not? And I think there's little question. You'll get a response. Trump's not a guy who I'm above that. I'm gonna let it roll off my, kind of roll off my back. I mean, of course, so you could at least like take a kind of a kamikaze run against him to get into sort of a thing. But the one thing that was that was giving this non-race any sort of um you know any illusion of being a race was Trump's been indicted 4 times. Do you really want to, are you sure you want to lock that in, because he'll lose to Joe Biden? Again, I remain relatively optimistic. But certainly there's plenty of evidence for Trump advocates and lickspittles to kind of say, like, what do you mean unelectable? Like, he's winning or he's tied, and we still haven't unified yet. So I don't know. There's kind of who cares, and there's no point. But like, to the extent there's any point, he could at least, I mean, Christie could at least um, recoup a little dignity that he had gotten, gained over the summer as the dude who'd completely, you know, shed his, uh, you know, Trump fealty and was really kind of going after him. Now he has sort of the worst of both worlds. He's completely, cut his ties with Trump, so he's dead to any Trump Republicans. And now the sort of the money guy, the billionaire Republicans who kind of want someone else, and the kind of the people in the kind of people in the news who hate Trump also think he's an idiot, because he choked when he had a chance to do it. He couldn't even take on DeSantis. So who knows? That's kind of why I was saying at the beginning of this episode, I almost feel like there might be some realization moments, sort of kind of like, why are we up here? What are we doing? Where's the roller coaster? Like, why am I here? What's happening?
Yeah, as far as I'm interested in what they'll kind of talk about, I'm interested if they get served up a question about, the shutdown and the behavior of the House Republicans. It'll be like kind of pseudo interesting to see who aligns themselves with Matt Gaetz and who, uh, tries to be part of the bigger House Republican kind of think group. And I think we can probably expect an abortion question because Trump called the Florida 6-week ban terrible.
Yeah.
And that could be kind of interesting just because Trump is doing his thing where he's making political calculations out loud that everyone is making, but that most people don't do in public. So
Yeah.
it'll be kind of interesting to have these more quote unquote traditional politicians in the sense that they wouldn't do that out loud to be faced with that, even though probably the easier off route is going to be like, well, I don't think it's terrible to protect babies and to protect life and blah blah blah. But you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
an easy basis for a question, so we'll probably get it.
yeah. Although, like as we said after the last debate, the fact that Mike Pence kind of
Right.
planted his flag on the 15-week ban, which is which just at every level of politics of the calendar of pregnancy is a lot different than 6 weeks. I mean, it doesn't mean there should be a ban at 15 weeks, but something like 95 or 96% of abortions take place within the first 15 weeks. So that's kind of almost like you, you've kind of given up the whole thing in some ways. So yeah, I mean, maybe the utter lack of suspense will. I mean, we're not ginning up a lot of interest for our coverage
I
tonight.
know, right?
You
Come
should
to
definitely,
TVM
yeah, you should
forward.
definitely tune in for all the excitement. But look, we're also going to keep it real, and this is kind of it's really kind of Republican cosplay,
Mhm.
right? I don't know if there's anything more to it. That said, definitely tune in
Oh, it's gonna be
for all the
a hell of a
excitement.
ride. Yeah, come
Yeah,
join us.
yeah, come join us. All right. I guess that's all we have for
Mm.
this week. I think we dealt with all the relevant issues, and notwithstanding everything we've said, definitely tune in tonight. We're gonna be doing live coverage of all the exciting developments in the Trumpless Republican primary debate, and we'll talk to you next week. I think that's all we got for this week.
All right, see you soon.
Later.